Hi there. Today is a very special day. 250 years ago today, the American Revolution saw its first battle with the British financier empire at Lexington and Concord. That battle continues in every way in most essential features today. It's also Holy Saturday in the Christian calendar, a day during which we reflect on Christ's bitter and agonizing sacrifice on the cross and his triumphant descent into hell, and the dark world without hope it might be without tomorrow's glorious resurrection. I find it useful, for my soul at least, to just think about the spiritual congruence of these two events in history and today's battles for the future of our republic. Now, this past week sharpened the differences for people about the world Donald Trump is forcefully bringing into being, along with an army of patriots, and the world he is leaving behind, the one the American people rejected resoundingly on November 5th. You can't exist with your feet in both worlds without shredding your body. Those with both feet in that former world continue screaming about their lost power and function. They have taken refuge in a politicized court system, many judges of which are veterans of the color revolutions conducted under the so-called rule of law throughout the world. From that sanctuary, they write and yelp incessantly about the chaos, the uncertainty, and similar testimony to their own discomfort with any change in the status they thought they had won by rigorously going along to get along. They claim they were standing on solid ground when most could observe they were sinking in quicksand and trying to take the rest of us down with them. I'm Barbara Boyd, and this is your Saturday Wrap. I'm going to provide you short situation reports on three battlefronts in our current war: the economy, war and peace, and the insurrectionary judiciary and immigration. First, the battle to rebuild the productive economy. So, the real villains in the turmoil in the financial markets were revealed to us this week by the statements of Fed Chair Powell and the incompetent former Fed soothsayer and Biden Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Both delivered coordinated attacks against President Trump's American system economic revival in order to inject further turmoil into the markets, hoping, I believe, to crash them. As with everything since 2008, they are on a destructive course which will destroy our country. And Donald Trump's policies, returning us to our revolutionary foundation, are the only hope to save us. President Trump is now focused on the top 15 nations whose trade policies freeze Americans out of their economies and reshoring all of the stuff which went abroad back to the United States. Active negotiations and deals are now taking place. All of them are at the table in one way or the other in the largest economic reorganization in world history. If Biden's predatory financial policies, born in the aftermath of the 2008 financial collapse, were to continue, we would have had a crash caused not by Trump's actions to rescue us, but by the criminal financial policies of Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen. And those crooks behind them, about to be exposed for their malfeasance, are behind the current turmoil in the markets. Powell, who was supposed to be nonpartisan, attacked the president's policies in a speech at the Chicago Economic Club this week, saying they would destabilize the entire system and cause inflation. Yellen, the woman I call pretend Yoda, opined all over the corrupt media that Trump's tariff policies were completely unnecessary and that bringing back manufacturing and supporting the working and middle classes were a pipe dream and catastrophic for financial markets. As many know, we have long called for nationalizing the Fed. It has to stop functioning as an alien institution of the central bank regime and the reserve bank for big banks and become a credit institution dedicated to lending for productive projects in the real physical economy, infrastructure, R&D, capital goods production, and advanced energy production, and revolutionary national defenses like the Golden Dome. The attempt to bring peace to the world by ending both the war in the Middle East and Ukraine are also at critical inflection points this weekend. President Trump has presented a realistic plan for ending the Ukraine war. It has Russia retaining control of the Russian speaking areas of Ukraine, who voted to become part of the Russian Federation already. No NATO membership for Ukraine, the issue which started this war, and a US led private redevelopment effort for the Ukrainian nation based on new gas and minerals deals to be signed next week. Meetings were held with Ukraine and the Europeans the last 72 hours, in which Trump said, in effect, take it or leave it. If you guys want the war to continue, we're out. We'll leave you to the mercies of the Russians. Those statements were made in the context of a new spring offensive set to take off, in which the Russians, absent U.S. support for Ukraine, will take what they want anyway. In the Middle East, the New York Times had a long and possibly accurate account of how Trump put Israel and Netanyahu down in their attempt to start a new war in the Middle East by attacking Iran's alleged nuclear facilities. Iran and the U.S. are presently negotiating a potential new nuclear deal, much to the disgust of the Israeli crazies and all the pundits here who continue to insist that Trump is somehow controlled by the Zionist lobby and is marching us to a new world war. Iran coming to the table at this point is, no doubt, the result of renewed collaboration between the United States and Russia. These moves for peace have been accompanied by Trump dismantling the key instruments used to provoke forever wars in nations targeted for resource looting by the globalist financier empire, the Institute for Peace, significant funding for the National Endowment for Democracy and related NGOs, USAID, the State Department and Homeland Security censorship apparatus. All of these have been or are being taken down and dismantled. Finally, I'll make a passing reference below to the Democrats' chosen battlefront, the deportation of violent gang members and criminals, as Trump implements the deportation policy the people elected him to carry out. So let's go, starting with Yellen and the Fed. Here's the deal with the Fed. As most know, it is a British central bank intrusion on the power of our Constitution given to the Congress and the president together to regulate the economy. The yielding of this power to this private imperial instrument has effectively decapitated the Congress in terms of the intellectual acumen and guts necessary to fulfill the duty the founders gave it. Most remember that when inflation was destroying our livelihoods, Biden had both Yellen and Powell declaring that inflation was transitory, a deliberate lie quite observable to all of us. After the crazy system built by the Fed and the mega banks crashed in 2008, the Fed provided $14 trillion in new support to the financial sector, not just here, but throughout the world, as Americans lost their homes and livelihoods. Lending stopped to the productive sectors of the economy. Instead, there were cash infusions to the banks, which were used for even more speculation. The biggest banks grew by 40%, while GDP growth collapsed to 2.2%. Hedge funds boomed. Financial speculation became the industry of the country, as whole towns, cities simply died along with the people in them. In September of 2019, Jerome Powell, who now attacks Trump's attempts to begin real production here as inflationary, was at the Fed. Janet Yellen was now Biden's Treasury Secretary, after helping lead the Fed and all the looting of the people from 2008 forward. Last week, Yellen came back into our lives again on TV, proclaiming that bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. is a pipe dream and hardly necessary, and that it will cause economic harm. Now, these two financier-compliant jerks and criminals, more recently, from 2019 forward, had set up an even more rapacious regime than the 2008 bailout regime. Between Powell's Fed and Yellen's Treasury, $9 trillion in new debt was issued to support their Green New Deal political program, a futile design to destroy the U.S. economy once and for all. They created the greatest flood of debt, deficit, and general government subsidy in the history of any nation. It's that mess which is causing all the chaos and uncertainty as Trump takes the necessary steps through tariffs and reshoring and other policies to get the economy producing again, producing the means to get us out of the kind of valley of death which Yellen and Powell created. Finally, a word about immigration. Most people know that Donald Trump was elected on the promise to close the border to drugs and millions of invented immigrants, the ones Biden was letting into the country. The voters said that Biden's controlled invasion had to be reversed, that those who came in illegally must be deported, starting with violent criminals and gang members. The problem Trump faces in doing that is, again, the fecklessness of our present Congress, who should be legislating and funding to ensure that the will of the people is carried out. Without significant changes, it is almost impossible to deport people. There's a backlog of millions of cases in the immigration courts, and the legal system's present regime to deport people often takes years. So Donald Trump has opted to find laws which he can use by executive orders to speed up this process, noting, as is true, that Joe Biden's policies created a drug and terrorism emergency. The Democrats have chosen to fight hardest on this front, using judges whose brainwashing started in law school with critical race theory and proceeded from there to such mental conditions as Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, unable to define in her congressional hearing what a woman was. In addition to this travesty of education, many of these judges are veterans of color revolution lawfare tactics, where the law is distorted by intelligence agencies to declare targeted foreign leaders corrupt, neutralizing them through lawfare, the same trick which was employed against Donald Trump for 10 years. Last night, the Supreme Court stayed, at least temporarily, Trump's effort to use the old Alien Enemies Act, a good act, for summary deportations of criminals and terrorists without resort to the immigration courts. But the courts, both by disposition and structure, are not up to deal with this generally. What is needed here is action by Congress, which is, again, in dereliction of its constitutional duties. We'll be working on that in the next week, both in terms of exposing the derelict judges and the actions Congress can take to get the so-called resistance out of the way. To summarize the immigration battle this week, there is a photo which Trump published yesterday showing the MS-13 tattoo on Kilmar Abrego Garcia's hand, the, quote, Maryland man the entire Democratic Party is now mobilized to call a martyr and a saint. So we walk in the footsteps of our forefathers now, uncertain how the battle will turn out, but determined and focused in the righteousness of our cause. The battle will turn on whether we get people off the sidelines as spectators and consumers of news and onto the battlefield, not with force of arms, but with force of intellect and mind. Just as farmers, blacksmiths, wagon drivers, and militiamen from every walk of life rode, walked, and ran to the scene of the fighting at Lexington and Concord. As Bob Ingram wrote in a piece on Promethean Action's website this week, almost 4,000 colonialists of every stripe were engaged in driving the reinforced British force of 1,700 soldiers back to Boston. We need that spirit now. I'll see you again on Monday. We won't have a class tonight because we all are using this time to reflect on the glorious day of Easter and Christ's resurrection tomorrow. Again, I'll see you again on Monday.
Thanks for watching. Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com.